Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Barb also asks, will Trump's DOJ really go after his enemies, or is it all just tough talk? I have always taken Donald Trump both seriously and literally. So if he says that that's what's going to happen, if the people around him say that that's what's going to happen, I think that they will do anything in their power for that to happen. I have no reason to disbelieve them. Maya Angelou says, when people tell you who they are, believe them. And I will believe them. Exactly what that looks like, we don't know yet. Will the guardrails of justice hold to prevent the actual lawfare being used in this administration as opposed to the fake lawfare that was alleged to have been used before by Donald Trump? I don't know. These are questions that we will have to see, unfortunately, Barb. So we will see. Happy 2025. I'm Kimberly Atkins Stohr, and this is Justice by Design. And I am so excited to kick off this new year with this new episode, an episode where you, my listeners, are the guest. I reached out on social media and asked you guys, do you have a question of me? What issues do you think we should be talking about this year on Justice by Design? Or is there something you want to know about me or how I do what I do? And boy, did you guys deliver. I got so many questions. I'm going to try to get through as many as I can here. And I just want to start off by saying how much I appreciate you, my listeners. This podcast has been quite a wonderful journey so far. In just the few short months, it has been operational, and I'm looking forward to 2025 being an even better year where we talk to problem solvers in figuring out how to make our world better. But for now, this is your show, so I want to get to your questions. Up first, we have a question from Professor Barb McQuaid. Hi, Barb. Barb actually asked me two questions. The first one is, how can we empower the Senate to undertake rigorous confirmation hearings of Trump's most concerning nominees? Barb, that's such a good question. I don't know how we can empower the Senate to vet these nominees the way that ought to be done, but I do believe that we have an abundance of evidence to show that the Senate confirmation process overall is really busted and is in dire need of repair, of reform, because these positions of people who are Senate confirmed to run our agencies, to sit on our courts, it's so important that we need a better system. The system has been horrifically politicized beyond repair. So I definitely want to talk to experts this year on this podcast to see how we can bring that to fruition. One idea that I have is something that we've seen happen. I think it was done for a poor reason the first time, but I think if done correctly, it could be really helpful. Remember the confirmation hearings of Justice Brett Kavanaugh? And when Christine Blasey Ford testified, the Republicans in charge of the Senate Judiciary Committee, instead of questioning her themselves, they got staff attorneys to do that job. It was for a terrible reason. They didn't really, in my opinion, have the chutzpah to face her themselves, and so they kind of pawned off this to someone else. But I think ideally having somebody who is not a lawmaker question nominees would be a fantastic start to a solution, or a part of a solution, because one of the biggest problems with confirmation hearings is that they're basically just an opportunity for lawmakers to get a soundbite, to put an ad, or to put online, or to go viral. They're not really there to do their jobs. If you take them out and say, we're going to submit our questions to someone else who's going to do the questioning of these people, then you're going to get closer to the substance and farther away from the politics. So I think that's something that should be a Senate rule, that allows other people who have been a part of the actual vetting process. These people need to get background checks and all sorts of things. Or the staff attorneys in the Senate Judiciary to actually do that questioning and not the lawmakers themselves is one idea that I have, but I'm looking for other ideas, and that's one of the things we'll be tackling. Barb also asks, will the DOJ really go, will Trump's DOJ really go after his enemies, or is it all just tough talk? I have always taken Donald Trump both seriously and literally. So if he says that that's what's going to happen, if the people around him say that that's what's going to happen, I think that they will do anything in their power for that to happen. I have no reason to disbelieve them. Maya Angelou says, when people tell you who they are, believe them. And I will believe them. Exactly what that looks like, we don't know yet. Will the guardrails of justice hold to prevent the actual lawfare being used in this administration as opposed to the fake lawfare that was alleged to have been used before by Donald Trump? I don't know. These are questions that we will have to see, unfortunately, Barb. So we will see. The next question comes from Canine Gal. I like you already. Probably my most pressing issue for the coming year is trying to stay engaged without bitterness. It would help if there was less political analysis and more reporting of truthful information without the attempt to be balanced. I want to know more about your path in communications and law. Oh, thank you for that question, Canine Gal. So I started out to be a lawyer. I wrote for my school newspaper in college because I thought it would be fun. But I knew I was going to law school, and you needed to, at that time, you needed to be either an upperclassman to write for the paper at my college or be a journalism major. So I just became a journalism major so I could do it earlier, and I loved it. And then I went on to law school and practiced law. And just it was not fulfilling to me, and I missed being a journalist, and that was sort of what spearheaded my career switch 20 some odd years ago now into journalism, because I thought I could do more good and have a better impact on the lives of people and on bringing about the kind of justice that I envisioned that I would do as a lawyer in journalism. And I don't regret that decision at all. I'm very grateful for my legal background. I still use it quite a bit. I've covered the Supreme Court for many, many years. It's helpful in covering government. Has been helpful in everything. But I still believe that journalism is truly important. The way that I see it, as opposed to fairness and objectivity, is that I try to use examples to shed light on how we can be a better society. That's sort of my lodestar in my journalism, whether it is pointing out what isn't working, whether it is speaking truth to power, or whether it is showing examples of how things can be done better. That's what I try to do. But I think that overall, and I include myself in this, journalists have been really rethinking what their jobs are. They should be rethinking what their jobs are and how they do it and what their moral sort of guiding lights are in a really serious way, because this is the only industry that gets specific, explicit protection in our Bill of Rights. And I think with that comes a great responsibility to do a better job. So I'm doing my best. I really do hope my colleagues do better as well. The next question comes from Salty Trollop. I love that handle. Man, awesome. With the death by 10 cuts of affirmative action, what do we have to look forward to in the area of housing discrimination, both home ownership and lending and rental subsidies? This is such a good question. And this reminds me of, for my racial wealth gap series that I did for the Boston Globe and the Emancipator a couple years back, one of the most edifying interviews I did was with Lisa Rice, who is a fair housing expert and advocate. She's written books about housing inequality, but she really does a great job to really pinpoint how all of systemic racial and economic injustice in America is really rooted in housing. in redlining, in denying access to home ownership, to land ownership, and that is a foundational stone of all the rest. You can't address any of this without addressing the housing gap first and housing discrimination first. Now this is Lisa, if you're listening, I would love to have you as a guest. I'm going to send you an email after this because that's a great topic and she is a great expert. So I suggest that you read her to understand that a lot better. Salty also asks, I suspect that environmental justice will rise again as an important issue given the incoming administration and SCOTUS efforts to reduce federal agency authority. What's new that we can use to prevent backsliding on prevention and remediation? One thing that I have found in my reporting on climate is that you cannot expect the situation to come from the top bottom because it doesn't work. Even when you have multinational climate pacts, you're seeing already now people pulling out of them, companies pulling out of them. That's not how it works. It works from the ground up. There are a lot of people doing innovative things on the grassroots level that can be replicated and reproduced if there is the will to do it. And that will really comes from you and me. It happens a lot on the consumer front. The more consumers, we talked about this with fashion a little bit on this podcast and also in my work at the Boston Globe. Consumers want to make better choices in terms of climate. They don't want to be buying things that are going to destroy the planet. They were horrified when they see the reporting about the impact of fashion. And so that is forcing the fashion industry and lawmakers to kind of push in a different direction because they're seeing how recycling can be effective if it's done well, how seeking more sustainable textile choices can be positive if done well, that using waste and repurposing it as fashion can work if it's being done well. People are actually doing it. So I think that's one of the areas where it has to come from the bottom up instead of the top down. And I want to do more episodes focused on that. So thank you for that question. The next question comes from Citizen Black, I think that's how you say it. How do we make news real again? I was thinking maybe use a legal requirement that requires a good faith effort at the truth. So actually that exists. Libel law means that you have to be make a good faith effort in your reporting to tell things that are truth, because if you do not make that due diligent effort, or if you are reckless or you disregard whether something is true or not, you could be liable civilly for liable civilly. So that rule already kind of exists in the common law. A lot of people are wondering what is needed in journalism. Is it licensing requirements? Is it other things to make journalists do their job better? The First Amendment makes a lot of that stuff problematic. Like I said, journalism is protected by the Bill of Rights. It's the only industry that is. There are strong free speech protections. There's only so much you can do in terms of licensing. It's really, you need to put your money where good journalism is happening. And that means subscribing to news organizations that do good work, supporting the work of journalists that are doing good work. It really comes from you, and that is what it is. I get really frustrated, and I often comment on social media for people who complain about paywalls and complain about other things. Journalism was never free. Back in the day, you bought a newspaper, you put down a quarter, you subscribed and it was delivered to your house. Because of the internet, I think people have a lot of expectation that journalism is something that's just supposed to exist out in the ether and no one pays for it. It can't be produced if no one is paying for it. You got to pay the people who do it. You got to pay the systems that distribute it. And the industry is still working out how to be profitable. I work for one of the handful of profitable news organizations in existence in America, which is crazy. But it does take money to be able to hire and keep people who are doing that good work. So you got to pay for it. Start local. Subscribe to your local newspapers. I think that is one of the biggest and most important solutions. Karen in Chicago. Hi, Karen. One of my favorite places. Um, Love your commentary and podcast. Thank you, Karen. My topic: how to balance commitment to making change and self-preservation. System change and service for individual people who need help now. Being open to other points of view and not enabling prejudice. Thank you. You had the easy questions, Karen. In terms of self-preservation versus system change and resistance, self-preservation is an essential part of system change. So you have to do one before you can even do the other. I highly recommend a book by Tricia Hersey called Rest is Resistance. It really explains beautifully why that self-preservation needs to come first before you can do anything else. So you are on the right track. Both of those things are not opposed to each other. They are necessary for each other. System change and service for individual people, again, one and the same. System change is supposed to be about service and people. So do you volunteer? Do you give your time, energy, money, whatever resources you have to causes that are important to you? That is system change. So I think those things are the same too. And being open to other points of view and not enabling prejudice. I have been really struggling with this a lot myself. And where I have landed, and I don't know if it's the right place for everybody, but I believe that it's a foundational principle to respect everybody's right to exist. But that doesn't mean that I have to stand for the refusal of other people to do that. And so that's what I fight for. I fight for a society where everybody has the right to exist. You don't have to agree with how they exist. You don't have to agree with every choice that they make, but other people don't have the right to stop them from existing or to try to reduce the space that they take up in our society. And I think if we can get to a place like that, we can get closer to a place where we can disagree on policy and points of view and really big, difficult questions without the kind of conflict and destruction that we are witnessing right now. I hope that makes sense. The next question comes from Jill Wine Banks, the Watergate girl, who actually asked me for my sweet potato pie recipe. So I have disappointing news for you, Jill, and maybe some other listeners. I don't cook from recipes. I never use recipes. It baffles my husband. Recipe cooking actually stresses me out. Like I'm too busy reading and measuring and trying to figure out like what it's just it takes the joy out of cooking for me. It's just not how I cook. But what I can tell you, what I can give is I can give you tips. So take any basic recipe for sweet potato pie and have that as your guide for measurements and stuff. I always say taste is the most important thing. So when I'm making a sweet potato pie, when it comes to the filling, I put in all the ingredients but the egg for, health reasons. And then you can actually just taste it and season it and spice it to whatever you like, and then make the egg the last thing that you put in the blender before you pour it in the crust. I have given up making my own crusts, and I am not ashamed. Pillsbury does the rollout stuff. That is fantastic. I keep some in the freezer, and that is done. Life is too short. I do, and I got for a Christmas gift from both my stepkids and my husband some par baking is one of my tips. Par bake the crust before you put in the filling. I got the gift of pie weights to put in. I was putting in dishes or something in the middle to keep it from bubbling up. But par bake that crust until you get like a light browning on it before you put your pie crust in. That way you get crispiness on the bottom to balance out. That's tip number 1. Tip number 2, roast your sweet potatoes. Do not boil them. Boiling your sweet potatoes leaches out so much flavor. And what do you do in the end? You end up adding more sugar. When you roast them, that sugar kind of intensifies and the flavor intensifies and gives you a much better filling. My last sweet potato pie tip is the secret ingredient. Instead of vanilla, sub it for bourbon. You're welcome. Tony Panino asks, I've been reading about resistance to the Fugitive Slave Act in the 1850s. Does that history give us any guide on how to respond to the planned mass deportations, especially if they are carried out by the military? Huh. I have not thought about the planned mass deportations that the incoming administration is promising in terms of the Fugitive Slave Act before. When it comes to Black Americans, um, I think the story is fundamentally different than when it comes to immigration. That's why I often say, when people say we are all immigrants, we're a nation of immigrants, I say, no, we're not. I'm not an immigrant. My ancestors were not immigrants. Immigrants are people who go for a reason. We did not come here for a reason. And I'm talking about my enslaved ancestors, obviously, not the enslavers. But I just think that the principles there are so different. But I believe, Tony, you are a historian, so I would love to be edified as to how you see it that way. There are a lot of other laws, even some that are a lot older than the Fugitive Slave Act, that I think come into play, including the one that Trump is planning on using, which is the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. Which was a wartime measure that was meant to allow for the ejection of non-citizens who were deemed enemies of the United States. But we have a long history, unfortunately, in this country of efforts to repatriate folks that are deemed not American enough. We have done it with Asian Americans, both in terms of efforts to try to rid them from the country or intern them. We have done that with Irish Americans. History is replete. And I think that's one reason why historically we see at times where these efforts are underway, efforts also simultaneously to restrict what is being taught in terms of history. We're seeing that right now too, because I think if we take a really clear-eyed look at American history, there's so much precedent for a lot of the awful things that are happening, but the people who are pushing that don't want you to know it. So I would say I have been reading history more than when I was a student, with far more zeal now than then. And I was a pretty zealous student just because I need to understand history to understand what is happening right now. So I highly recommend that other people do that too. I will drop a piece by Politico in my show notes that sort of outlines some of this, which is a good place to start. Araminta's Legacy asks, a full, perhaps painful to some, conversation about the DOJ, their little rules, which are not actual laws, truth, passed by Congress, and the lack of full due diligence by Merrick Garland. You know what I'm going to do with that? I'm going to kick this over to the list of questions for hashtag Sisters-in-Law, my other podcast, because I want to hear what Barb, Jill, and Joyce have to say about this too. I know some of us disagree. I wholeheartedly agree. It is true that DOJ rules are not laws. They are not passed by Congress. But I also believe that the DOJ needs rules that are not passed by Congress, because it is governing how they lead their litigation efforts. And that is not a congressional role. That is for the DOJ as an arm of the executive branch to make those rules. So not every rule not passed by Congress is bad. The rule I think you're referring to, which is the Office of Legal Counsel memo that provides, among other things, that sitting presidents cannot be prosecuted, I think it's ill-advised. But that doesn't mean that it was not implemented with a lot of thought, deliberation, and that there weren't reasons behind it. We may disagree with them, but I want to save that for the prosecutors because I am not one. So I'm going to kick that over to our list. So keep looking out to see what the other sisters say to that question. The next question comes from Dwight Clark, who asks, what ideas do you have regarding the methods or actions we can individually take or contribute to quote, resist or cause friction? I am doing something each week to hopefully cause friction. For example, write my congressional reps, urging them to block recess appointments and pass the Press Act. Dwight, do not sleep on the power of reaching out to your elected officials. I I was just talking to a lawmaker the other day, and one of the first things she said to me was recounting the things that she is hearing from her constituents who call and write and email the office. They do pay attention to this. They do listen. They realize the pulse. They have no reason to not have their finger on the pulse of what their constituents want. So doing that is very, very valuable and very, very important. Just what you're doing, making an effort, making it a value to engage in being a solution finder and being a part of the solution speaks volumes. You can do that by volunteering, as I said, for organizations, to being vocal to your lawmakers, to making sure people have access to the vote. This is an effort that doesn't just take place around elections. It takes place all year long to ensure that that is protected. I thank you and commend you for being a part of the solution. You're doing exactly what I think needs to be done and what others should be doing too. So thank you for that. Cody's Comment Cafe. Y'all's names are just tickling me today. I see the systemic destruction of our laws and institutions as the most pressing issue because to me, the vulnerable are in real danger. I agree with you, Cody. I think mostly about the most vulnerable people because what is happening to them not only impacts their lives so much more, but it's a harbinger of what will happen next to all of us. And so I think that's an important way to think about most of the problems that we face in society. So I appreciate that comment from you. I have a question from Joyce Vance. Professor Vance asked me, I have so many questions, but for now, I want to know more about why Snickers always looks so sweet and calm in your pictures. What an angel. Well, Snickers, bless her heart, does look sweet and calm in all the pictures because Snickers has two settings. 1,000 and off. And I can only photograph her when she's off because when she's at 1,000, she would just be a blur. She is a sweetheart. She is loving. She is frantic. She is exuberant. She is anxiety ridden. She is deeply concerned about everything. She is like me in dog form. I really adopted myself. I would invite her to come say some things herself, but again, my husband and stepson, her two favorite people on earth, are in the house, so she is wherever they are. Snickers, come. Yeah, she's gonna ignore me. I'm sorry, but she would love to get a visit from Aunt Joyce sometime, so the invitation is open. My next question comes from Meredith, who says, I want to know if the mystery of where Snickers was hiding the deer antler was ever solved. We're getting a lot of Snickers questions. So, no. So for those who didn't see my post on social media, I bought Snickers a elk antler to sort of keep her occupied, especially in situations that might cause her anxiety. She loved it, but almost immediately, like within days, it disappeared. Now, she did not eat it. Snickers is, I know some dogs can eat those things whole. Snickers is not one of those dogs. Like her toys are pretty pristine for the most part. It takes her a long time to even get a little hole in a toy. She has Benabones that we bought when we adopted her that she still hasn't finished yet. Like she does not go through hard things like that. She's pretty soft-mouthed. So I know she didn't eat it. But I thought it just got under something or it got stuck someplace where she couldn't get it. So I bought her another one, and within hours, it too was gone, which says to me, oh, she's hiding them. She's hiding them somewhere in the house, and we have to find them. My husband and I have turned this house upside down, and we cannot find them. I think this is one of those mysteries that will only be solved if and when we move. So Snickers has secrets in the house that even I don't know. But thanks for asking about that. Meredith also has another question. Can you explain the implications for the first E. Jean Carroll case being upheld and how this will play out? Will Trump have a specific number of days to pay the $5 million, or will he be able to avoid that because he is soon taking office? Will this be the same for the second case appeal still under review? This is a great question. So the answer is no. Trump taking office, being president, has nothing to do with the civil judgment against him. It does not toll that judgment. If that litigation were ongoing, being in office would not stop him from having been deposed, for example. In that case, we saw that Bill Clinton was deposed during the civil case brought by Paul Jones during his presidency. So while being in the Oval Office does shield you from a lot of the criminal prosecution, it totally ended his federal criminal prosecution. Has nothing to do with civil cases. So what will happen is he has the right to appeal. He can appeal. He can take every appellate avenue available to him, but when those are exhausted, and if that judgment has been upheld, then it is satisfaction time. Either he writes a check, or E. Jean Carroll can begin attaching his assets to pay for that judgment. So he can't run from that. The next question comes from Cynthia Natus, who asks, will the ERA finally get to be the 28th Amendment? That is a great question. I don't think so. I think that requires political will that we don't have. But you should listen to, if you haven't already, the Justice by Design episode on the ERA with Jill Wine-Banks. We talk about this, and she is the expert of the ERA. She's the one I go to for everything I want to know about the ERA, and that was a great episode. Next question, will assault weapons get banned again in the U.S. and save school children across the nation? No, I think it will not. The reason is the culture. We have a gun culture in America that is like no other place in the world. The law will not solve the gun problem. A culture change is required to solve the gun problem, unfortunately. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. Cynthia also asked, will Citizens United finally get removed so we can have real elections again? This was also a question asked by Tim from Newark. Again, no, because this Supreme Court gave us Citizens United. So the only thing that will take away Citizens United is another Supreme Court that sees the constitutional analysis differently. Unfortunately, they are the final say when it comes to the constitutionality of laws that would hold people accountable and limit their financial contributions. Yeah, so those are good questions. I wish I had more positive answers, but I just don't think that. Oh, Cynthia's final question is, will you get another dog and name her Milky Way? Oh my gosh. You know what? This may cost me my marriage, but the answer is maybe. I think that's a great idea. I love it. Milky Way. Oh my God. Snickers and Milky Way. All right. We'll stay tuned. The next question comes from Smurfette61. I love these names. What do you theorize should be Vice President Harris's next act? And do you figure her legal background will play a part in it? So, second part first. Her legal background, I think, has been her lodestar in so many ways about her views on justice, what is right, how to protect people, how the government should be about serving people. I think all of that is directly related to her legal career. So undoubtedly, whatever she does will be a continuation of that. But what do I theorize should be her next act? The answer is whatever she wants it to be. To me, I think that it is a shame in politics that people who are in politics, particularly women, particularly Black women, are often told what they should do for the greater good of whatever, the party, the nation, whatever. When my experience is, you don't need to tell a Black woman what to do because she probably already knows. I take the example of Stacey Abrams, who drew the ire from Democrats for her decision to decline to run for Senate at a time that the Democrats proclaimed that her party needed her to run for Senate. She said she didn't want to. And that was enough for me. That's a job she didn't want. She's going to have to do the job. She's going to have to campaign for the job. Every success and certainly the failures are going to be on her shoulders from that job. So she should decide what job she wants and stop telling her what to do. What did she do instead? She did the hard work in Georgia that allowed not one but two senators from the Democratic Party to go to Washington. She knew what needed to be done. Don't tell her what to do. So I'm not going to tell Vice President Harris what to do because she already knows. The next question comes from Anna Mookie. Can we move the Overton window on expanding the SCOTUS? So, Anna, I appreciate the question. I appreciate you for listening. I don't think that expanding the SCOTUS is the solution. I think expanding the SCOTUS only expands the problems that we have with the Supreme Court, both in terms of how they rule and how they govern themselves. So I'm not a part of that Overton window, so I'm probably not a one to ask. I think we need to reform the SCOTUS in many ways. I think that term limits are a great idea, staggered out. I think that certainly enforceable ethics codes are the first step to reforming the Supreme Court. I don't think making the bench bigger will solve the problem. I think it will make it worse. The next question comes from Frost in LA. Should the former presidents attend the inauguration? Oh, I personally am struggling with traditions that I've always embraced. I've always thought that, yes, this is a moment that we show the nation and the world that we know how to peacefully transfer power. We can put our views and policies and feelings aside for a moment for the greater good of the nation. I am questioning the value of that. So I don't know. The answer is I honestly don't know if former president should attend this inauguration. I think that's a decision that they have to make. But I will not begrudge anybody who doesn't. And not just this one, future ones too. I have to rethink what that means for me and what that means for the nation. And that's a work in progress. See. AV Folly, I hope I'm not saying that wrong. I'm sorry if I am. Is there any recourse for Trump not signing a code of ethics that states that he won't have conflicts of interest? So, yes, that is a rule that governs his transition, which would have allowed him federal funding for the transition to hire people to get what he needs to set up his offices in the government to get going so that there is a smooth transition. That would have required him to sign those ethics rules that would have required disclosure. He did not, so he doesn't get that money. He doesn't need that money. His donors, his deep-pocketed dark money donors, are funding this. So that's the problem, that the only penalty is not getting federal funding, which he actually doesn't need. So that law needs to be reformed so that there are real teeth, so that there are no choice. You don't sign this code, you don't transition, and you don't become president, point blank period. That's what the law should say, in my opinion. The next question comes from SOOC for Pete, who asks, maybe take a deep dive into the relationship between federal, state, and local governments. Pete, we don't have all day, but I will say this to the question, because you're talking about the possibility of blue states defying the federal government. States have more power than the federal government in really, really important ways, which means they can grant more protections in many ways that the federal government can. That's why you have states where abortion access, for example, is still available, and in other states they're not, because states can protect that even if the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade. I think that being aware of and engaged in your local and state level politics is crucial. We spend so much time talking about what happens here in Washington. The real game is what happens on a local level, and I think people need to get more involved. I also think that's a reason to invest in local news and to subscribe to your local news organizations, whether it's donating to your local public radio news stations, your local newspapers, your supporting local TV stations, whatever you need to do to make that coverage robust. That's where so much of the important actions are. What happens, what your mayors and city councils and school boards and state houses do is so much more impactful to your life than whatever happens here in Washington. So that's very, very important. But again, I'll also ask the sisters-in-law to dive more into federalism because it's such an important topic. Dave from San Diego asks, with Trump's penchant for suing any reporting that he doesn't like, and in light of media outlets settling lawsuits or not even defending their journalists, what effect do you think this will have on individual journalists reporting? Devastating effects. I am very proud to work for a news organization that I know will support me and stands by my work and will continue to. Not every journalist has that luxury, especially those who work for smaller news organizations or who are independent. I know of independent journalists who have Substacks or podcasts or other forms that are not a part of larger media organizations who are taking out libel insurance and having to pay from their own pockets to protect themselves. This is on top of protecting themselves from threats and attacks and other things too, because of this. The purpose of these threats is to stifle this work, and it can be effective for people who don't have the protections to keep speaking truth to power. So this can be potentially devastating, especially for a lot of the smaller and independent upstart news organizations that are doing such good work, but that may not have the wherewithal to fight lawsuits like this, which lawsuits against news organizations have made them go under. It's happened many times, from Gawker to many other circumstances. So it's a real problem. Laura from Portland, Oregon, where we had a live show and enjoyed ourselves very much with the sisters-in-law. Is it plausible for someone in a position of power to take action against Justice Clarence Thomas by investigating the specific cases that directly affected his benefactors, i.e. Harlan Crow? It is plausible. It is a function of the House and Senate. That is the only way that this can be done, is if the House opens up an investigation through their impeachment power. And that could lead to articles of impeachment, but they can do that investigation. But again, there's no political will for that, so I am not holding my breath. Parkin from Charlotte. I had a dream that I was in Charlotte the other day. So maybe I need to go back to Charlotte. And, I will give restaurants recommendations because maybe I will be coming through there. How do you resolve respect for the rule of law with the dismissals of cases against Trump? Listen, I will let you know when I do it. It is hard because I do believe in the rule of law, but the rule of law is failing us. I'm trying to resolve that. That's one of my 2025 resolutions. So, work in progress, Parkin. Thanks for the question. And finally, from Carly in Boston, my adopted hometown. What a great way to end. What are the most effective ways to limit the dangers of disinformation? Would strengthening defamation laws help get the ball rolling without raising questions about civil liberties? I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but I have a great Justice by Design episode with one Barb McQuaid where we spend the entire time talking about disinformation and really effective ways to combat it, and both legal and other. I highly suggest that you read her book, The Attack from Within, which has also really good examples of that, but that was a great discussion. So I suggest that you take a listen to that. It was one of my first episodes here on Justice by Design, and it was a really great one. And with that, we are out of time. Thanks to everybody who sent me a question. I was really overwhelmed, not only with the volume of questions, but with the thoughtfulness of them and what you're thinking about. this is really rewarding to me. I will tell you that I take all of this to heart, and it's the reason why I do this podcast. I want to have more conversations, not just in the legal and political realm. And I know that's where a lot of my work and expertise is, and that's where a lot of these questions were focused. But I want to talk about hunger. I want to talk about how we can better educate our kids, regardless of where they were born or how much money their parents make. I want to talk about how we really protect our planet. I want to talk about how we get to a place where we can have civil discourse in America. I want to talk about fighting racism. I want to talk about the fight against all the terroristic threats that we face, that unfortunately 2025 came in with a fresh reminder of. There's so many things that I want to tackle on this show and tackle them with you. So this is a good exercise for y'all. Always feel free to get in my mentions on Threads or Blue Sky and give suggestions about things you want to hear more about or learn more about. And I will do my best to bring those to fruition. I will bring in really smart people who know so much more about this stuff from me. And 2025 is going to be a year, no matter what, of solving some problems. We're going to do it right here. Happy New Year to all of you. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.
Hey, it's Ryan Seacrest. Life comes at you fast, which is why it's important to find some time to relax. A little you time. Enter Chumba Casino. With no download required, you can jump on anytime, anywhere for the chance to redeem some serious prizes. So treat yourself with Chumba Casino and play over 100 online casino-style games, all for free. Go to ChumbaCasino.com to collect your free welcome bonus. Sponsored by Chumba Casino. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply.